Hello, welcome to Unfair Fights. My name's Rebekah. This is my brother Nathan, and we're going to be having a continuation of a family fight that's been going on for 25 years. I'm a young earth creationist. My brother is an evolutionist, and we're both Christians. And Christians can have differing opinions about this topic. You can be a Christian and believe in evolution, but I don't know why you would want to be. So I'm always trying to get my brother to stop believing in evolution. And tonight we're going to be talking about dinosaur footprints, but I'll give Nathan a chance to introduce himself.
So my name is Nathan. And I usually won't go in too much about my past, but I think it's relevant here just to give you an idea where I come from. When I was growing up, my father would give me scientific explanations, even though we were Christians. I say scientific, maybe that's a loaded term, but let's say old explanations. I'm very into geology, very into astronomy. So although I'm a layperson, I read, I'm a big proponent of this website, phys.org, because it's where scientists are, giving kind of layman's explanations of their papers. So I try and keep up on normal scientific subjects or, kind of different areas of science. But for this argument today, I'm the one who's in an unfair advantage. Rebekah has an advantage. And we've decided that as soon as the topic is announced, we will not study it ourselves. So the person this week is me. I have to deal with these dinosaur footprints without any prior research.
Right. And at the end of this show, Nathan's going to announce what our topic will be for next week. And from the time he announces it, I will not be able to look up and study anything about that topic. So that's what makes this an unfair fight, is that we have to each take turns just being kind of set off guard and needing to defend our worldview without prior research. And so we also would like to depend on the audience. So if you have a comment that's relevant to this, please do tell us, because this really is about pursuing truth. And so we want to get the truth of the topic. So tonight, if I was able to do the research on dinosaur footprints to ambush Nathan with this topic. So if you feel like he's at a disadvantage and doesn't have all the information, please do put the information in the chat, and it'll be like a phone a friend. So, well, without further ado, I'll just kind of introduce the topic. So, this is something that has been on my mind since I moved to Utah a few years ago. And all over Utah, we have these sites where there are dinosaur footprints. And so I recently visited one of these sites and I took these pictures of dinosaur footprints. And, for me, seeing these dinosaur footprints just got me thinking about how this doesn't really seem to match up well with the evolutionary story. And so I'm eager to hear how Nathan is going to explain how these dinosaur footprints are just on the surface of the earth, and there's dinosaur footprints on every continent except Antarctica. We've discovered dinosaur footprints. So, why are all these dinosaur footprints on the surface of the earth when they don't stick around for very long? These will only stay for like hundreds and possibly even 1,000 years. But why are they here when dinosaurs were so long ago, according to the evolutionary story, roaming the earth? So here's a picture of the area. The pictures of the dinosaur footprints that I just showed is from a place called the Dinosaur Stomping Grounds. And here's what the area looks like. That's what the land looks like. And here's another picture of the area. And I'll just give some basic facts about this area. These dinosaur footprints are in a formation called the Curtis Formation that's about 60 feet to 110 feet thick, depending on where it's located. It's thicker in some areas. And you can see the kind of the strata that it's in. There's the Morrison Formation above it, the Somerville Formation, then here's the layer that it's found in, the Curtis Formation, and then the Entrada Sandstone. So these footprints are found in that Curtis Formation. And I would like to know, Nathan, what is your explanation for why we can see these footprints?
So I didn't do research, obviously, but I have, since I've known the topic, I have been kind of going through a mental exercise, trying to figure out how I would approach this problem. And so I think, one thing I would mention is that these footprints are in some way special. And I think that's going to play into my narrative going forward. I mean, we have dogs running around, we have goats and all kinds of things running around all the time. And, whether you believe the earth is old or young or whatever, obviously most footprints don't stick around very long. They just get washed away or stomped on by something else. And so I do think that in some way, these footprints are special. And the fact that maybe they're all around the world, maybe in different layers, maybe it points to something that's special about that specific time period. And so first thing I would want to know if I was looking for something that's younger or older is I might take a sample, because I'm guessing that this was clay or something like that, and do a carbon dating test. Now, if and we could talk a little bit about that maybe another time, but basically there's the amount of radioactive carbon in the atmosphere is different than what's in the ground. And so, as an animal incorporates carbon that's active in the biome, they maintain a certain amount of carbon, radioactive carbon, and then when they perish, that decays. So that test is only good, I think, for, I don't know, 20,000 years or something. Feel free, phone a friend to tell me the specifics of that. But anyway, so I would test, and if there's no, radioactive carbon, or it's, diminished to a certain amount that it's, not really a precise test, then I know, okay, these are older probably than 20,000 years. And then you have to go to other things. There are other types of dating. I'm not as familiar with those, so I'm not going to go into that. But instead, what I would do is try and look at maybe the stratification. Rebekah named some things. I've never heard of these formations. It's a little bit too in the weeds for me. But what I would do is ask some questions. Okay, what are some cataclysmic events that could cause these footprints to be preserved? And so, we have some more recent examples of preservation or petrification, or whatever you want to call it, like Mount Vesuvius, where you had a pyroclastic flow come through and people were entombed in this pyroclastic flow, and so these forms of their bodies are still there. Another one, which is a little bit more man-made, let's say, are these imprints on concrete where people in Nagasaki were vaporized by a nuclear explosion, and the difference in the temperature, on the concrete there created an impression. So, so some possible cataclysms for these dinosaurs. It could be a supervolcano. It could be a glacial flood. So, scientists say that, at different times you have these kind of dams, these glacier dams. And I think in this area, even there's these glacier dams, and then water builds up and it can just cause this huge deluge to come through all at once and destroy everything. And then there's also a meteor strike. So I'm going to go through two of those. One is supervolcano. And in this case, you would have this huge amount of material lifted into the atmosphere. Depending on how close you are to the volcano, the effects might vary. So that's.
But how would that how would that make the footprints? It would cover over the footprints, and like, how are you saying that would make the footprints?
So let's say that there was a super volcano, and so if you had a large volume of ash that covered everything, that might create a layer that then kind of protects the mud or whatever that the dinosaur has stomped in. And then maybe a chemical reaction between those things starts to harden it. And then at some point, things get built up, and at a later point in time, maybe, a river or, things wash away that top layer and expose these dinosaur bones or dinosaur footprints. So that's one possibility. But the one that I'm really going for here is a meteor strike. Okay. So, um, you can imagine, so there was a strike just off the coast of Mexico, and apparently it made a crater, expanding crater that was like a mile high, and blew a whole bunch of stuff into the air. And there's parts of Texas where you have all of this jumbled up weird rocks and stuff from all over, kind of mixed together. And I imagine one thing that would happen if you had this much energy deposited on the surface of the earth is that essentially the atmosphere would heat up and cook everything. And so I can imagine these dinosaurs are stomping around, they're stomping through the mud, they're having a grand time, and then all of a sudden, hey, now the temperature's like an oven, and they all bake and die. And at the same time, it would start the process of hardening the clay or whatever that they stomped around in, because it's like a kiln. You have this huge temperature, and it's just cooking the ground and cooking these prints into place. And so what I would look for, if to test this hypothesis, is there's a layer of strata I know about. I think it has iridium in it. It has an element in it that is common in asteroids, but is not common on the surface of the Earth. And this layer exists all around the world. So sometimes it's more clear, sometimes it's not. And before that layer, you have a lot of animal fossils and things being happy, and then all of a sudden most things are dead. So that I'm going to guess that this was, if you look at the strata around this, that this is going to be, if my hypothesis is correct, that there's this thin layer of this iridium or other element. Friend, help me out here if I've got the wrong element, but it's some sort of element in it that's enriched compared to what is normally natural on the surface of the Earth. So that's my go-to theory.
Hey, those are I like your stories, Nathan. I mean, really, I'm impressed by what you came up with without doing the research. And you know what? You do have a good friend in the chat, because Dr. Joel is here, and so he's probably going to have some good insights for you. But let me just bring up, before we go on, I'm just going to bring up a little bit of information of what was like on the plaque at the place to kind of give the evolutionary story. Okay. And so basically, these footprints were supposed to be deposited 160 million years ago in the late Jurassic period. They say that this site was the coast of a seaway called the Sundance Sea. So there, if you look at the picture here, you can kind of see that this area in Utah, they believe it was once a sea, and that, basically this was like the coast, and maybe these footprints got, impressed into the mud, and then it flooded, and that brought sediments. Now, the explanation for how these are exposed now, this wasn't on the plaque. I just kind of looked this up in, Googling it. Basically, it says the Curtis Formation has been experiencing uplift and erosion for the last 65 million years, and portions of it have been exposed for tens of millions. Okay, So maybe that will help you a little more as we go on, because I like your stories, but I'm not satisfied. But I thought I would give you the evolutionary story told about this, and I'll give you my story. And so, and by the way, maybe not every young earth creationist will think like me, or maybe they won't have the same idea about it, but because there's arguments about how, what's post flood, and I don't even know if this is supposedly, I think most young earth creationists would probably say these are flood sediments. And I'm going to mute you. I think Nathan had to take care of a child real quick. So, okay. Yeah, but so, for me, these prints are not millions of years old. They are thousands of years old. Then, what's interesting is that we find these prints all over, all the continents. And it seems like the explanation that I've seen for all of them is basically they were impressed into the mud when the mud was like not too wet, just the right level of wet and dry to be able to make an impression. And then the area was flooded, and then there was, deposits of some other material that helped encase it, and then it hardened over time. So to me, that really sounds like the exact scenario if we think about Noah's flood, right? Like, we would have animals, we'd have, the waters slowly rising, animals looking for higher ground, making impressions in the mud, and then the floodwaters come, and then a sediment layer covers these, but not, thousands of feet of other sediments built on top, like as in the scenario proposed, but maybe a light sediment on top that would be able to eventually be uncovered by rain and such, and now be visible to us today. And when I looked it up, that's what I see as, a lot of these tracks are discovered when, like, suddenly, an area just becomes more, erosion suddenly exposes an area, but it's usually like not very hard sediments that are exposing these fossils. And so the problem I have with the evolutionary story is that you have to have all of these like incredibly hard sediments that then get eroded over millions of years. And it doesn't seem very plausible that like they would erode in just the right way to expose these tracks, like that whatever is causing the erosion is going to be able to perfectly dig out these fossils. Seems really implausible. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that there is some, similarities there to your narrative and the scientific and the old narrative. I think for me, if there was a flood, you wouldn't just have these dinosaur tracks, right? When you have like a broken down city in the same mud, or like a human, human hand grasping for breath or something. I mean, wreckage of human habitation, or even just fossils of other modern animals that made it onto the ark, scattered about there. But and I guess in terms of the stratification, I do think that your point about the uncommonness of these footprints being exposed is valid. But I think probably it's just the amount of total footprints over time that were deposited, and the amount that would be surfaced at any one time in history, there's just a certain number of those. So, for instance, in there's certain parts of the crust, cratons, I think they're called, that are very, very old parts of crust. That's like in Australia. There's other parts that are new, and so I think a certain number of these prints have been destroyed by mountains and things like that, and other ones have remained intact, and a certain number of them come to light every so often and erode away. And so we're kind of taking a snapshot of, like, let's say there's 1 billion footprints out there somewhere under the ground, and we've discovered a few thousand. Well, okay, you do the math and you say, okay, there's going to be any number of those footprints, most of them that are still buried deep underneath the ground, that are going to be coming to light at any one time. That's how I would explain that the footprints are now being revealed.
Okay, well, and actually, that is one of the explanations that Dr. Joel gives. And I want to put up, we weren't going to do this until later, but he actually says something about the volcanic ash. So I want to put it up here because I think he's agreeing with he says, my video yesterday was about dinosaur feces that are preserved in the 100s. They are preserved in a layer of volcanic ash. That layer of ash preserved the feces and footprints in the same area. Cool. Okay, so I guess that's a good theory. So good job, Nathan. Now, so okay, I can agree that there was uplift. Okay, so over time. I mean, I just believe it was a shorter amount of time, right? I think we can see the evidence of like uplift of certain areas, but like I would say that was in a short time during and after the flood. So and it's fine to assume that there are more prints basically at every layer that we would expose, but it is just an assumption, right? Like, we don't know what's in all of those layers. And so, I don't think we can really assume that there's billions. I don't think that, I don't know. It still seems strange to me that after, like, when you consider all, that these tracks were supposedly laid down 160 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so the percentage of time in that they would be visible, basically, like, we're seeing it in the time that's like 0.0006, like that amount of that time frame, we happen to be seeing these here and in other places all over the world. I mean, does it strike you as a little bit unlikely?
It does. I mean, I think it's, in all fairness, I think it's pretty extraordinary that you could have something so transitory as a footprint get preserved. I mean, for any one footprint, it's like a miracle, right? But at the same time, we're all miracles. I mean, we know that, there were millions of sperm that could have made it to the egg, and I just happen to be the one that comes out. Now, is that miraculous? Yes, in a way it is miraculous. But in another way, it was bound to happen because there were so many footprints laid down. That's what I'm thinking, So even though there's really special conditions that are required to get it to be preserved that long and then to come to light at some point, it is like a miracle that it's coming to light now for us, this one footprint. But I just think it's got to be a numbers game, And the other thing that's interesting about this is that, if you're thinking about footprints in the mud, a dinosaur is going to make a much deeper footprint than a human, right? And so maybe just, also one little, this is just a real side note, but I'm just thinking that a deep impression of mud might be more likely to fill in with some sort of, water or something, some other element of the, the surroundings, and become a pool of water. Maybe you have bacterial action, you have other things that are happening in this pool of water that's created by a giant dinosaur footprint that maybe you wouldn't have happen in the same way for the same duration of time as a human footprint. I don't know. That's just all speculation.
Yeah, well, and so actually, we do have some human footprints that are preserved as well. We do have some mammal footprints that are preserved. And I actually put some of this in the slides in case we talked about this. This is my slide showing, I was trying to figure out how many dinosaur footprints we have around the world. And it was really hard number to get. So this probably isn't right, but this is like all of these sites combined make about 100,000. Now I've heard Dr. Joel say we have millions. I could not find millions, but you know, I did find what I think is like 100,000, you know, individual sites that add up to about 100,000. And then, oh yeah, I was going to show you this is something actually also from Dr. Joel's site. And these are mammal prints. Okay, I'm sorry, elephant prints that are supposed to be 7 to 8 million years old. Okay. Now I'll come back to that in a minute. I'll show you that in a minute because this is one of those that I think the explanation is bad. But let's talk about the dating for a minute, because you described how we might date those footprints. And, you know, I don't think carbon dating, we can't do that because there's no living thing there to date, and only living things can be dated with carbon dating, or things that were once living. And so actually what we're having there is just the impression in stone. So I don't think we can carbon date those. But what I was able to find, and anybody can correct me if I'm not correct about this, but they are actually dating the footprints by how old they believe the formation is. Okay, so, and what footprints we find might affect how old they think the formation is. Okay, so
Yeah.
what
So
I mean is, like, so why are these prints only 7 to 8 million years old and not as old as the dinosaur prints? Because this is supposed to be, you know, the elephants aren't supposed to be been around as long. So that's my impression, is that the dating is very subjective, and it's kind of based on, you know, what kind of things we find and how old the layers are assumed to be, not on any dating method, right? Like, and so, okay, go on. Do you want to say something?
I mean, yeah, I think for me, I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that the closer you are to modern time, the more subjective it becomes. And my reason for that is that, you know, so like for somebody who's drilling for oil, right? They know that there has to be, you know, biological matter that gets deposited, then salt, then this, then that to happen, right? And so if they have, like, let's say 20 layers of strata, representing different geological times and positions of the continents and everything like that, then I'm guessing that they're, you know, if they were trying to like pin it down to 20 years or even a million years, maybe saying, you know, maybe they would say, okay, it's between 20 million and 80 million or something, let's say. But when you're close to the surface, I think it might be a little bit more difficult, because you don't necessarily have the picture is still happening, right? This is like recent history in terms of geologic time. You know what I mean? And so maybe it's more difficult to date, and there is a little bit of circular reasoning happening. I don't know. So I think that's just a guess. You know what I mean? Maybe it's easier to date.
Well, I think you are right in that, like, let's say if they're trying to use volcanic ash layers or something, if it's something on the surface, then there's no layer above it to test or whatever. And they don't have, if it's a layer on the surface, they don't have an igneous rock layer that they can use for radioisotope dating and that kind of thing. So yeah, but I think, you know, they're still proposing that the layer of the Curtis Formation that, you know, has those dinosaur tracks, they're saying that's 160 million years old. And so I guess, you know, it may be based on what tracks are there, or, you know, just how they're doing the layers. And so but what I wanted to come back to is these elephant prints, which I know this is going slightly off topic, but like, so this is kind of it, but it brings up part of the problem that I have with these dinosaur footprints. So on Dr. Joel's video, he was like, look, here's these elephant prints. These are 7 to 8 million years old. And he was like, you know, everything, basically the idea is that all the rock was once at the level of this one rock that's here, and all that rock eroded except for this rock. And I think that is kind of how most of the dinosaur footprints are thought to have, you know, basically at one time been under solid rock and then eroded all that. But to me, it's like, when I look at this and I think, yeah, right. I mean, solid rock on top of these prints, and then it's going to get exposed without tearing up the prints. It's a little implausible. And then why isn't it just a better explanation to just say that rock got moved there? You know what I mean? Like, whatever, the water or whatever brought that rock there. Like, rather than saying like all of this whole area was solid rock at one time and it slowly eroded over millions of years, but magically. So this is where I want to get with the prints. Like, how are these things getting eroded out in your view after millions of years, and then they're able to get eroded in just the right way? I mean, I already asked you this, but I don't know if you really gave a good answer for this.
Well, I mean, I know that people can tell a lot about rocks and things like that by how like angled they can be, you know. So in terms of, you know, we always have water on this planet in most places, at least, eroding away things, and so I would guess, this is just a guess, that the layer that the elephant prints are in, you know, if we're saying, okay, they were covered over, they were exposed to heat and pressure, right? You have igneous rocks, you have sedimentary rocks, and in between you have metamorphic rocks that are sedimentary, exposed to heat and pressure. And I think that that's what's happening here. And when it's exposed to heat and pressure over time, it changes chemically. And maybe not in all cases, but I think in most cases, it by nature, because it's heated and compressed, it becomes harder. And so the material on top may have also been in a process of transformation, but maybe it had not undergone the same level of transformation as that rock below. And so, you know, you may have had, just by nature of the way how much it was compressed and heated, that you would expect the deeper you go, the harder it becomes. And so in that way, I would say it makes sense that you would be able to have a time period, at least, where the top is removed but the bottom remains. But ultimately that will also be eroded away down to something deeper if it stays exposed to the Earth's atmosphere or stays on the surface, you know. That's just total riff there.
Right. But I mean,
but I guess
do you think, do you admit that like my scenario seems a little more plausible?
Well, here's what I mean. I would challenge you about this, because there's all kinds of things we haven't thought about in terms of a great flood. Okay. And maybe you've come up with answers to this, but if you had a giant flood that covered the whole earth, right? How would those prints stick around? And your scenario, because in terms of turbulence and the cataclysm, it's, I mean, if there's just gigantic wall of water, I mean, well, you tell me, how do you explain it with the giant flood?
Well, to me, it seems like really, actually, I think there's a lot of evidence for the flood and for this type of like catastrophic movement of sediments that would actually be perfect for explaining not only the dinosaur footprints, but, all of the fossilized animals that we have. Because it does take an extraordinary thing, it takes rapid burial. So, I mean, I'm envisioning the flood and the movements of sediments all over the earth. And actually, that's what we see. We have like sediment layers that go across, one continent and pick up on the other side, on a different continent. We have and we don't see anything like that happening on Earth today. We have all of these gigantic formations of sediments that we see. We don't see that kind of gigantic, massive movements of sediments happening anywhere on Earth.
I disagree. I do disagree. Number one, your process has the problem, the same critique that you made of my process, where how would the top be less easier to erode than the bottom, right? See, I have an intermediary process, which is the heat and pressure of time of the sediment building up. For you, there is no time for that sediment to bake, right?
Well, there's plenty of time. There's thousands of years. I mean, and that's the thing, is y'all are so used to throwing around your millions and billions. You think everything can be solved by just throwing some millions and billions in there. But thousands of years is a long time.
Yeah, for a human, maybe. but I mean, for a rock, I don't know how long that really is. But and then in terms of sediment, I do think that there are processes that we see sediment building up in large quantities. It just doesn't happen on what we call the surface, right? Like if you look at Babylon, or where the Tigris and Euphrates are dumping into the sea, that has been pushed out over time in just short time scales. And so if that then got uplifted, you would see this gigantic amount of sediment, alluvium, I guess, whatever it's called. And it would be this gigantic bulk material. So I do think that also indicates that time has happened, that there's been uplift and things have sunk over time, and the opposite is happening because of man-made stuff in Louisiana right now, where it's receding back. But if the natural course of the Mississippi had not been diverted and whatever dikes and stuff built, then I would expect there's a kind of an equilibrium there. You would have Louisiana, the landmass of Louisiana, expanding out into the Gulf of Mexico, or the Gulf of America now, or whatever. But but because of man's intervention, now it's actually receding. So there's some sort of equilibrium there. But I do expect that in certain areas, at least where rivers are active, over time, you would deposit materials on the ocean floor or the sea floor. And if that land then got uplifted, you would see these huge formations of sand and stuff like that. Also, in Africa right now, East Africa is in the process of the tectonic plates breaking up, and so you can kind of see some of this stuff happening with the lakes that are in Africa. You have this abundance of biological activity, and it's depositing material on the floor of that lake. But as those continents separate, I would expect at some point there would be an intrusion from the sea that would then cover over that material. And I believe that that's the start of the formation of hydrocarbons, because you have this material and then it gets entombed in salt. So I think that we're still seeing these processes happen today. I think you're on. Are you muted,
Oh,
Rebecca?
sorry. Okay. Well, like I said, I don't think that we're seeing it to the degree like, um that we see it in the sediment layers that we have on Earth. I don't think that we're seeing, and we'd have to get the numbers. So maybe that would be a good topic for another show to kind of really see how those you know, deltas and things emptying the sediments, if they can really be compared to the types of massive sediment layers that we have right now. So, okay, is there another thing that you want to challenge me on with
Well,
regard to dinosaur footprints?
I'm just thinking, if the flood occurred in, let's take the biblical narrative, okay? So that you have these uh, there was no rain before, there were just kind of the springs of water coming up from the ground or something, and that when the flood occurred, these gigantic geysers or something spewed out of the ground, and the, the first rains and stuff happened. Okay, so it sounds, 40 days of this or whatever, but I mean, the 40 days, I think it only rained for what, 7 days or something. How long did it rain? Do we know in the Genesis account?
I think it was like 40 days, but I don't quote me on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so we'd have
Yeah.
to examine the story a little bit, but I would imagine that the disaster that's occurring at such speed all over the world, water coming up to the level of a mountain, that fast, I assume that there would be a lot of turbulence there. And mountains being thrown around and everything like that. And here we have this freshly made dinosaur mud puddle. The dinosaurs walked along, it stomped in the ground and made this perfect imprint of its foot. And then we have this giant cataclysm that happened everywhere, and the only people that are safe are in this rocking boat, going back and forth, and debris going. It's like worse than like these tsunamis that come in, and even then you see water can just like cut through concrete. It's moving so fast and so powerfully, and so you just think this water all over the world just cutting and churning, and then the wrath of God, boom, like everything, just everything getting destroyed. And here's this perfect little dinosaur footprint at the bottom, just sitting in the mud, and it just stays perfectly fine through all of that.
Okay, well, let me just say, when I look at the surface of the earth, I see the remnants of what you just described. Because if you look everywhere, I mean, if you ever just flown in a plane and looked at the Southwest, it looks like it just got flooded, right? Like everything looks very affected by massive amounts of water. And so, even when you look at the mountains, and by the way, I mean, a lot of the creationists who talk about flood geology and hypothesize about that, they're not saying that there were all of these mountains before the flood. A lot of the mountains came to be because of the flood, and it was, it wasn't just like, oh, water, rain, and water spewing. This was tectonic shifts. Like, this is like the source of
Yeah,
how we got the divisions of the continents and all these things.
yeah.
Okay, but now
Africa and
getting to,
South America.
yeah, so this is, and actually in the sediments, look what we find. Like, these sediments that are supposed to be millions of years of slow sedimentation, and yet there's a gigantic whale fossil, buried in what's supposed to be 100 million years of sediments, but suddenly whale. You know what I'm saying? Like, how, like, that looks much more like the whale got stuck in a massive amount of mud, right? And this wasn't millions of years of sedimentation. It was one cataclysmic act that trapped this whale,
But these
right?
footprints seem to fall to go against that. I mean, you're saying that Africa and South America. I mean, I'm looking at a map, a National Geographic map, right? And it's like a third, not a third of the planet, but let's say a fifth of the planet's size, right? And you have these two massive continents. And you're saying in the course of 40 days, these things shifted that far across the Earth. And yet, these little footprints in the mud are going to remain intact.
Well,
Unlikely.
and now I can understand that you're not making a bad point, okay? But what I'm saying about it is that like not all of this happened like in one moment or in one day, right? Like so imagine dinosaurs trying to get to higher ground, and we do have a lot of tracks that are like going in the same direction, like like they're like trying to flee or something like that. And in so like just imagine that their footprints were in the mud. Okay, a couple days it gets baked in the sun, and then flood waters come over it, and a sediment layer comes over it, right? And so it would be preserved in that way, in the same way that the evolutionary story is saying that it got preserved, right? It was able to be preserved because it got quickly buried, but by a different type of sediment. You know what I'm saying? So like it didn't wipe out the impression. So
I think in both cases, we're saying it had to be. I mean, or at least with these footprints, what you're saying the plaque said is that it's buried. So we're kind of saying the same narrative.
Yeah.
There on some levels, right?
Yes.
Sorry.
So let's see what do you have another objection?
No, I think I'm good. I think I've destroyed your argument sufficiently. Just kidding.
Wait, we should take a vote from the audience. Which story is more plausible? Which story about how the dinosaur footprints came to be is more plausible? And I will just kind of look at the comments, but while I'm picking out some good comments, why don't you tell the audience what our next topic is going to be for next week? And this is a topic Nathan is going to choose. I don't know what it is. The moment that he says it, I am not allowed to do any research this week. I have to formulate my own ideas about how to answer his topics. So go ahead.
So, in thinking about the topic, I do think that I'm going to need more help from the super users, or unfair friends, let's call them, on certain topics like evolution. But with Big Bang cosmology, I think I'm pretty rock solid in terms of my, my knowledge. And so I think, to start with an easy one that Rebekah has probably had to face before, I think, there's really two ways that cosmologists estimate the age of the universe. One of them is the background cosmic radiation, microwave radiation left over. And the other one is the distance ladder. And so I don't have to prove that the universe is 13.8 billion years old or whatever. But I think that the topic for next week is, how does Rebekah explain the fact that there's one galaxy, big galaxy, at least it has dwarf galaxies as well, but Andromeda is moving toward us, it's getting blue shifted, and all the other galaxies out there are somehow red shifted, and they seem to be moving away farther, faster the further they are. And how does she explain the red shift at all?
I feel like you're throwing me a softball. This is a softball. I appreciate that. I think this is a softball, but we'll see. But I'm glad you actually picking a topic that I know something about. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun. So, okay, so I won't do any research on that this week. I will not look at anything about the redshift. And so I want to put, and we have some cool people in the chat here, guys. Thank you so much for being here. And there's a lot of good comments. And so, okay, I already put that one up. So, Dr. Joel says there are human footprints that are under hundreds of feet of ice age sediments in Great Britain. No flood necessary to do that. Okay, interesting comment, and that might be a good topic for another time. Dr. Joel says, I'd say it's pretty common. There are millions of footprints exposed right now. I tried to look that up. I couldn't find millions of footprints. So if you have a source on that, please do let me know, because I would like to know where these millions are. I could only find, like I said, in like 100,000, maybe slightly more or less. And
I feel a bit sorry for you, Rebekah. I already have an unfair friend here, you know.
I know. I need some young Earth support here. I need some young Earth support. But okay, but actually here he's talking about other types of footprints. I was only looking at the dinosaur footprints. So I'm sure there are probably millions of other types of footprints that are in the chat. But anyway, put your vote in the chat for who won and which side are we leaning toward today. Who gets the points, evolution or young Earth? And Investigative Millennial says the difference is that there is no precondition that says there have to be any footprints. Okay, and there's a lot more from Dr. Joel, and I really appreciate you being here and writing all this, but I don't know if I'm going to read all of these comments. RBH says, I love the way they can speak to each other without getting angry. I wish we had more discussions like this among Christians. Thank you very much. Well, I can tell you, it hasn't always stayed this friendly. Look, we have had some heated discussions in our family that just get everybody slamming doors and all kinds of stuff. So
it's family fun time. I mean, this is what we do for hours and days at a time when we get together as a family. So,
and not just on this topic though, because actually we haven't touched most topics related to young Earth and evolution. Maybe a few, like broadly speaking. But Hunter Biden's laptops. These conversations are so dishonest. We know YEC isn't true, and it's a bit irresponsible to pretend that its advocates are interested in an exchange of evidence. Oh, but then he follows up with the most sense she's made in a while. LOL. Thank you. Wow. Cool. Well, actually, I think there's some really strong arguments for young Earth. So I think we're going to have some fun here. And I'm looking forward to hearing if there are any responses to those. Ortis Malum says, if the biblical flood was true and everyone but Noah and his family survived, why are there so many civilizations with no connection have stories of a flood? Well, I think because the people from Noah's family spread out, they had children, and there was a strong, storytelling and remembrance of that event. So that's my answer to that. I think, it is something that's told around cultures around the world, and it's because the only people who were survived came from Noah's family, and everybody knew about the flood, and they passed it on to later generations. So Hunter Biden's laptop says Rebekah is either lying about the evidence or needs to admit she doesn't have adequate training to understand it. Well, there are a lot of things that I don't have adequate training to understand, but that's why in this show, we want people who have expertise to chime in and tell us if we're saying something wrong. we're happy to know the truth about whatever, the evidence shows. And we aren't going to be experts in everything, but this is about exploring the ideas and critically thinking about our worldviews. And so I think we can do critical thinking without having expertise in every field. So if you guys have any comments about what we said, please do put them in, in the comments section of this video later. And Ortis, we'll have to have this conversation. How did Noah's family get around the incest problems? Actually, what's interesting, and this is really going off topic, but we actually have strong evidence that we are all descendants from even the evolutionary story has a major bottleneck, but we are all very closely related genetically. And there's somebody called mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam that they're saying these are our two ancestors that everyone is descended from. And there is not a lot of...
I would just like to say thank you, Rebekah, for providing me intel on some future topics that you might declare so that I can do some research on that.
Yes. Okay, so here we have a vote. Bruce says, Nathan's position feels more plausible to me. Much evidence of differential erosion rates, but not enough evidence for rapid hardening to preserve flood concurrent tracks. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thanks for watching. And Bruce is part of our Intelligent Design Network here in Utah. And so if anybody wants to join our Intelligent Design Network, please check it out our website.
So can I just respond to that though real quick?
Yeah.
I think we both agree that at least some of these tracks could be formed by flooding. So then young Earth creationists have the same problem. They have to figure out how these tracks get hardened. For how do you have rapid hardening? So I think for that one, we both have that problem, if it is a problem.
Well, the other thing I want to say is that there's also a lot of evidence that the sediments were quite soft when the mountains were uplifted. Because, when you look at the mountains, and there's lots of examples of this in Utah, you see layers upon layers that are like very curvy, And so if sediments get laid down and then they are very hard, then they will crack if they get shifted, right? But if they're soft when they get laid down, then there's room for them to become like curved.
I actually think the opposite. I mean, I think if you had rapid layering with a gigantic flood, I think you would have more flat layers, right? But with these curvy layers, because everything's buried and there's a lot of heat and pressure, I think that it's kind of like taffy, at different points. And so you can have this kind of deformation that happens over time and seems continuous. Whereas if it was instantaneous, it would be like a hammer hitting a rock, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think that here, that argument is on the side of time, large amounts of time.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. And Nathan, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I just had a great time. So thank you for doing this, Rebekah, and I look forward to
watching.
Yeah, I look forward to our discussion next week.
Me too. Okay, good night, everybody.